In this video, I will show you how to perform CRUD operations using ASP.NET Web API, SQL Server, and Entity Framework. So I will show you how to create, read, update, and delete events. Now let's create a new project. Then here let's select C# and Web, and let's select ASP.NET Core Web API. Then next. Let's call this project Web API. And let's call the solution TODO App. Then next. Then here let's select .NET 9 and let's use HTTPS. Also we need to check this box to use controllers. Let's click on Create. So this is the created project, and by default we have this controller, we have this model, and we have this file. So let's delete them. Then let's create a new database, so we can use Server Explorer, and let's create a new connection. So the server is available on my computer, so we can write dot, then slash, and the instance name, which is in my case SQL Express. Let's select Windows Authentication, and we need to trust the server certificate. And let's create a new database, we can call it DB22 for example. Then OK. So here let's click on Yes to create this database. Let's expand this connection. Let's expand tables. And for the moment we don't have any table. So now we need the connection string that allows us to connect to this database. So we can make a right click, then Properties. And let's copy the connection string. Then let's save it in our project. So let's go to appsettings.json. Then here let's create a new section. And let's call it connection strings. Then let's create the first connection string. We can call it default connection for example. And let's paste the connection string. Then we need to delete the spaces, otherwise we will have an error when we try to connect to the database. Then we need to add Entity Framework packages that allow us to connect to the database using Entity Framework. So let's make a right click on the Web API project, then Manage NuGet Packages, then Browse, and here let's type EF SQL Server. Then let's install this package that allows us to connect to the SQL Server database, and let's install it. Then we need to install another package, which is Entity Framework Tools. So here let's write EF Tools. And let's install this package that allows us to use these commands on the Package Manager console. So let's install it. Now let's close this page. And let's create the DB-Context class that allows us to connect to the database using Entity Framework. So this is a service, so let's create a new folder. And let's call it Services. Then let's create a new class. And let's call it Application DB-Context. Then let's extend the DB-Context class of Entity Framework. Let's add the namespace. Then let's create the constructor, so we can use this button. Then let's create the constructor that requires this parameter. Now let's add this class to the service container so it can be used by the other classes of this application. So let's go to program.cs. And let's add the application DB-Context to the service container. So just here, we can add builder.services.addDB-Context. And we will add this application DB-Context. So to fix the error, we need just to add the namespace. Then let's configure this function to configure the DB-Context class to connect to the SQL Server database. So let's provide it with an arrow function. And here we need to read the connection string that we have in appsettings.json. So we can create this variable, and it is equal to builder.configuration.getConnectionString, and this is the name of the connection string that we created just here. Then we need to call options.useSQL Server. And let's provide this method with the connection string. Then let's create a model that allows us to read and write the data from the database. So this model is called entity model because it allows us to create a table in the database. So first let's create a new folder. And let's call it models. Then let's create a new class. And let's call it event. Then let's add the different properties of this class. So we need the ID, which is the primary key of the event in the database. Then we have the title, the description, the start date, the end date. So the end date is optional. Then we have all day, which is a boolean, and we have created at. Then to create a table in the database using this model, we need to add a property in the application DBContext class. So here let's create a new property of type dbSet. So we can create this property. It is called dbSet of event. So event that we have here is the entity model that we created. And the name of the property will be the name of the table in the database. So here we have this error, so we need to add the namespace. And now we have this warning, so to get rid of this warning, just here we can add required. Then let's create the events table in the database. So let's save all the files. Then let's go to Package Manager console. So first we need to create a migration file. So let's write add migration. And let's create a migration file called first migration, for example. So this migration file allows us to create the events table in the database. Then to create the table, we need to call update database. Now let's take a look at the database. So let's refresh the connection. And now we can see that we have this table that has these columns. Now let's fill this table with some data. So just here we can make a right click, then new query. And here let's write the SQL query that allows us to fill the events table with some data. So we can use this SQL query. So it allows us to insert some data in the events table. So here we can see that and is between double quotes because and is a reserved word. Now to execute this query, we can use this button. Let's close this page. And let's see the data of this table. So we can make a right click, then show table data. And you can see that we have these rows. Now let's create an API controller that allows us to perform CRUD operations on events. So let's close all the tabs. Then let's create a new API controller in the controllers folder. So let's select controller, then API controller empty. And let's call it events controller. So this controller will be accessible at the URL that starts with /API/ the name of the controller without the controller word. So it will be accessible at the URL that starts with /API/events. And it is an API controller. So to read and write the events from the database, we need to request the application DBContext from the application. So we need to add the constructor of this class. Then let's request the application DBContext. Then let's save it into a field, so we can use this button, then create and assign field context. Then let's create an endpoint that is accessible using the HTTP GET method that allows us to read the available events. So we can create this method. It is called action method and it is accessible using the HTTP GET method. So here we will read the available events using this context. So we will use the property events and we can order the available events by descending order of ID. So this parameter is of type event. Then we will return the list of events and we will return a success response with the list of the events. Then let's create another endpoint that allows us to read the event by ID. So we can create this action method. It is accessible using the HTTP GET method at the URL of the controller, which is /API/events/the event ID. So the event ID is a parameter that is available in the URL. So here we will read the event ID from the URL, then we will read the event having this ID. If the event is null, we will return not found. Otherwise, we will return a success response with the event details. So here I called the event EVT because event is a reserved word. So if we write event like this, it is a reserved word. So to get rid of this error, we can write it EVT, for example. Then we need to create another endpoint that allows us to create events. So first we need to create a DTO model that allows us to receive the event details from the client. So let's create a new model in the models folder. And let's call it event DTO. So this model is very similar to the event model, so we can copy the properties of the event model. But we will not copy the ID because it will be generated by the database and we don't need the created at because it will be defined on the server. So we can copy these properties. And let's paste them here. Also, we need to add validation annotations. So the title is required, so we need to decorate it with the required attribute. Also, the start date is required. So the description is optional, but we can define the maximum length of the description. So just here, we can add max length. And we can set the maximum length of the description to 500 characters. Then let's create the endpoint that allows us to create events. So we can create this action method. It is accessible using the HTTP post method at the URL of the controller, which is /API/events, and it requires data of type event DTO. So here we will create an object of type event. So we will set the title, the description, start date and all day using the data of event DTO. And we will set the created at property to the current date. Then we will add this event to the database using context.events.add, and this is the new event. And of course we need to save the modifications. Then we will return a success response with the new event details. Then let's create another endpoint that is accessible using the HTTP put method that allows us to update the event details. So we can create this method, edit event. It is accessible using the HTTP put method at the URL of the controller, which is /API/events/the event ID. So here we will read the ID from the URL and we will read the submitted data of type event DTO. So first we need to read the event having this ID. If we don't have the event, we will return not found. Otherwise, we will update the event title, description, start date and all day using the data of event DTO. Then we need to save the modifications in the database and we will return a success response that contains the updated event. And finally, let's create another endpoint that allows us to delete events. So we can create this action method. It is accessible using the HTTP delete method at the URL of the controller / the event ID. So here we will read the event ID from the URL, then we will read the event from the database, so we will read the event having this ID. If the event is null, we will return not found, otherwise we will delete this event from the database, so we can call context.events.remove, and this is the event that we want to delete. Then we will save the modifications and we will return a success response. Then let's run the application. So before running the application, let's take a look at the file launch settings that we have in the properties folder. And here we can see that we will use the HTTPS profile, which is this profile. So we will not open the browser and we will run the application at this URL. So this is the port number that will be used. We can use it, but I prefer to change it, so I will use the port number 4000. Now let's save all the files and let's run the application. And here we can see that the application is listening at this URL. So to test the application, we can use Postman. So let's open a new tab. Let's select the get method and let's provide the URL that allows us to read all the available events. Then let's click on send. So we obtain a success response, and here we have a list of events. So this is the event with the ID 9, then we have this event, and this is the list of all the available events that we have in the database. And to read the event by ID, we can just add the event ID in the URL. So let's read the details of the event with the ID 8, for example. Then send. And now we have only the details of the event with the ID 8. Then let's create a new event. So we can open a new tab. Let's select the post method. And let's provide the URL of the controller. Then we need to send the data of type event.dtu. So here let's select body, then row, and here let's select JSON. And let's provide the event data. So we need to provide the title and the start date. So the description is optional, the end date is optional. We can provide the value null or we can delete it. So here I will delete it. Then we have all day set to true. So if we remove the title, we should have a validation error. So let's remove the title and let's send the request. And here we have a bad request response. So we can see that the title is required. Now let's provide the title and let's send the request. So now we have a success response, and this is the details of the created event. So the new event has the ID 10. Now let's update this event. So let's update the title and let's provide the end date. So here let's select the put method. Let's provide the event ID. Let's update the title. And let's add the end date. Then send. So now we have a success response, and this is the updated event. So we have a new title and we have the end date. Then let's delete events. So we can open a new tab. Let's select the delete method. Let's provide the URL of the controller / the event ID. So we can delete the event with the ID 8, for example. So if I click on send, the first time we have a success response because the event has been deleted, and if we click on send again, this time we have not found. Now I will show you how to read the available events using a front-end application. So I already prepared this file. Let's take a look at the source code. And here we can see that we have this table. So in the table head, we have these columns. So we will display the event ID, the title, the description, the start date, the end date, the all day, and the created at. Then here we have the table body, which is currently empty. And this is the ID of the table body that allows us to fill the table body. Then here we have some JavaScript functions that will be executed when we open the page. So this method will be executed and it will send a GET request to this URL. And when we receive the data, we will call the method loadTableData and we will provide it with the data, which is the list of the events. So this is the method loadTableData. It requires the list of the events. Then we will read the table body by ID. And for every event that we have in this list, we will create a new table row. So in the first cell, we will display the event ID, then we will display the event title, then we will display the description, the start date, the end date, all day, and created at. Now let's open this file using the browser. But for the moment, we can see that the table is empty. Let's take a look at the console. And here we can see that we have this error, cross-origin request blocked. So to fix this error, we need to enable the course policy in our application. So let's stop the application. Let's go to program.cs. And let's configure the pipeline to enable course. So we need to add app.useCourse and we will allow any header, any method, and any origin. Let's run the application. Let's go to the browser and let's refresh the page. So this time we can see that we don't have the error anymore. And here we have the list of the events.